We're live. It is 6:57. I am ahead of the schedule. Hope everybody's doing well. Sunday night. So hopefully you got some stuff done on your projects today, which is very cool. Tonight we're going to be talking about big, gigantic throttle bodies like the one that's in the photo, the thumbnail that I use. Is dual 105 millimeter throttle bodies when 105 millimeter throttle body just isn't enough for what you're trying to do. As you see in the thumbnail, also, not only are they giant 105 millimeter throttle bodies, but they have, it's a nice radius entry and all that stuff. Actually, I think that this thing was designed to go up to the cowl area. And this is if I remember right, I think that this was an aluminum Ford GT block and built motor with, ported heads and cams and also and a big Kenny Bell blower that ended up making over 1,500 horsepower. And one of the many things that they did to get it to make that much power was that they put massive throttle bodies on it, because to be able to feed, to be able to produce 1,500 plus horsepower that they were making, you need to get a lot of airflow into the blower. And this is our discussion for tonight. Let's see, and this will be our poll. We'll get our poll going up very early. Can you run two? Yeah, that's too simple. We'll make this better. Okay, so the poll for tonight is, this is throttle body related. So we're going to talk about throttle bodies. Will too big of a throttle body lose power down low? You have no idea how often I get that comment or question, because what happens here is, guys, and understandably so on an internet level of things, they're equating throttle body size with carburetor size. So as we know, like I have the photo and the video that I did running the 292 inline 6-cylinder Chevrolet, fairly low power output, but we went from a 1-barrel opening and then stepped up to a 2-barrel adapter and then a 4-barrel adapter, and then went from a 4154 barrel to a 4500 and ran a Dominator style carburetor on our 1-barrel opening. And so with that in mind, obviously you can put too big of a carburetor on there, but the carburetor relies on its signal for fueling. So you're going to change not only, the airflow wouldn't be too much of a problem, but it will determine also what kind of fuel you're going to get to the motor. And fuel is very important, as is airflow. So the question is, will we hurt low speed power with too big of a throttle body? And I also wanted to use this photo because I just think that throttle body is super cool and super gigantic. I mean, I guess you could put 4 of them on there, but what it gets down to eventually is that the opening in the blower was only so big. Basically, you're looking at the outer wall or measurements, and so you can only put so big of one in. You could flare the thing out, which I think that they had to do this, and then being able to fit that. They do have another. This one flowed even more than their single big. I think it was a 168 millimeter oval throttle body. This one flowed quite a bit more than that. I think that this was the biggest one that they did. Now they need to just hollow that thing out and then put the big blade in. Although the problem is, when you start doing that, there's not enough, there's too much surface area on the blade, and you can get it to not work after you decel it. And when you go to wide open throttle, it also may not want to close. So you have problems associated with big throttle bodies. But you do get lots and lots of airflow, especially when you have a nice radius entry and all the things that they did on this one. So this one was pretty cool. So the question is, will you lose low speed power with a bigger throttle body? Because let's say you go wide open throttle at 2,000 RPM. If you do that with a big throttle body, like on a fuel injected combination, will we lose power from doing that? Now let's talk about when you need bigger throttle bodies. Obviously, on an application like this, and not just this one, because it was making 1,500 plus horsepower, do you need big throttle bodies? But on any positive displacement supercharged combination, big throttle bodies are always a good idea. Whether it's the 3800 that we ran, that I have up all the videos on, a positive displacement M90, I don't care if it's an M45 from an old Jackson Racing kit that we ran on lots of things. Like I think we ran I think that if I remember right, I think that the Focus kit was like that, and some of the smaller single cam Hondas were the smaller M45. But even on that, everything that you can do to get more airflow into the blower is going to result in more power out of the blower. If you restrict it, if you see vacuum between the throttle body or any of the inlet and the blower, you're going to have less boost coming out of it. So it's a direct correlation. So if you've got vacuum, you're going to have less boost. If you don't have vacuum, you're going to have more boost. So you want lots and lots of throttle body flow going into a positive displacement blower. A centrifugal blower, very rarely do you ever see the throttle body in front of feeding the centrifugal blower. So the centrifugal blower, unlike a roots blower or a twin screw blower, a centrifugal blower normally blows into the throttle body. So in that situation, it becomes less critical for blower size. Like you don't need these gigantic throttle bodies because now you have pressurized air going through the throttle body. So as you know, at 10 PSI, 20 PSI, 30 PSI, the flow rate as we go up in boost pressure, the flow rate of that throttle body is also increased dramatically. And so you have to go pretty far before you get into restrictions of what I would call normal size throttle bodies. If you put a 25 millimeter throttle body, about 1 inch in diameter, if you put that on any motor and try to blow through it, it's going to be restrictive. But like a junkyard LS, if you have a 78 millimeter throttle body on there, you can easily make 1,000 horsepower. In fact, you can make way over that with that throttle body. So there's no need to go up to a 102. I normally recommend that the throttle body size match the opening in the intake manifold. So if you buy a fast 102, put a 102 on it, or a 105 for a Holly one or whatever. I normally recommend that. It's not necessary on a boosted application. I would be a little concerned depending on how the throttle body is done. Like I wouldn't have a problem if I'm running a boosted application and I didn't want to spend a bunch of money on a 105 millimeter throttle body. I wouldn't think twice about putting a smaller throttle body if I somehow got a good deal on an intake manifold and I was going to mix and match them under boost, because you're not restricting the throttle body under, or the motor under boost with a throttle body as you're blowing through it. So I would do that. I would just be worried about more about sealing and stuff. If the opening in the manifold didn't match up to the opening in the throttle body, that means it's going to overhang it. So is it going into other areas that could cause leakage problems? And those are the things I would be concerned about. But on a blow-through application, I include centrifugal superchargers and turbos on almost any kind of application. You don't have to worry nearly as much about throttle body size because you're forcing air past it and it's going to work just fine. So I usually, just like with cylinder heads on a cammed LS turbo motor, I don't recommend cylinder heads normally. I also don't recommend stepping up in throttle body size. On a Kenny Bell supercharged or a Whipple supercharged or a Magnuson supercharged LS, I definitely would recommend not only a throttle body upgrade, but whatever the biggest one that you could put in there. And not just throttle body, the inlet between the throttle body and the blower, and anything in front of the throttle body. You should have a cold air intake manifold, not just an open filter under the hood, because that's not the right way to go. You might as well, you have negated your intercooling if you've done that. So any sort of tubing that you have that's directing air from hopefully a cold air source, that should be big and not restrictive on any kind of forced induction application. Now, so let's talk about NA applications. NA applications would be kind of between those two extremes. You would look at the throttle body as a necessity once you saw vacuum behind the throttle body. That's the easiest way to tell. If you have vacuum behind the throttle body, just like we saw with the blower, you are restricting the motor and it could be making a little bit more power. So that's why we monitor vacuum on the dyno. And if we're tuning an EFI thing, we see that, as a KPA reading. So we want to see if there's any vacuum in there. If you start, if you're running a 600 horsepower, let's say, naturally aspirated LS motor or a 5-liter Ford, that would be a good one. Maybe a 351 or a 408 stroker, that kind of thing. And it's fuel injected and you have some kind of throttle body on it. It should be big. It should be a 90 millimeter, like an AccuFab throttle body, to feed that power level. You're not going to be able to do that with a stock Mustang 5-liter throttle body. It's just not nearly big enough. In fact, almost none of the throttle bodies that we used back in the day the stock throttle body, which I think was a 60, a 58 or a 60, and then a 65, 70, 75. I mean, a stock LS throttle body is bigger than our big throttle body was for the 5 liters back in the day. A 90 is really good for as long as you have the intake manifold that goes along with that. Putting a 90 millimeter throttle body on a naturally aspirated 351 combination when the inlet going into the throttle body is 75 is not going to do anything. In fact, it might be that the blade would actually hit the opening on the intake manifold. So it's not a good combination. You can adapt that with, like, they have EGR spacers that are one size on one side and a bigger size, you know, the tapered bore basically, so that you can install that and you can do that. But again, the gains from that, because the opening in the manifold is still that size, it's going to restrict that. So if you're going to do this, like with the LS stuff, match the throttle body size to the opening in the intake manifold, and you'll have gone a long way towards maximizing the airflow going in. But you do have to match the throttle body size. It's a little bit less critical on naturally aspirated motors, because let's face it, a 102 or 105 millimeter throttle body, if we're talking about the LS stuff, a throttle body that size can feed a lot of power. I mean, a lot of naturally aspirated power. It can feed a lot of engine speed. It can feed lots of displacement. It can feed quite a bit of power. Although there are lots of NA motors where more throttle body than that is necessary. I had a 495-inch motor where that would not be a single 105 millimeter throttle body would not be anywhere near enough flow for what we were doing. We had two, I think we ran a big Dominator on it. We also ran a high ram, I think, with two 4150s. I don't think I ever ran two Dominators on that motor. I probably should have. I don't know that it could have used that. It was making 820 horsepower or thereabouts. But again, you experiment with those things and you see what it responds to at that level, because it might be that it does indeed respond to that. Maybe you're getting, like with the dual 4150s, maybe you're getting better airflow to each of the cylinders, not just the maximum airflow of the two of them relative to one. I know that when we ran the dual quads, when we ran two 4-barrel carburetors on there, I think two 750s, may have even been two 950s. When we ran those on there compared to having it fuel injected, it made more power with the carburation. And so there's charge cooling going on there, but also we had more than enough airflow combined with the charge cooling. So it was kind of the optimized deal. But in terms of throttle body size on an NA motor, match the throttle body for your power level. And the way that you look at that is measure the vacuum in the intake manifold behind the throttle body and go, oh yes, there's zero, Richard, there's zero vacuum here. Okay, you're good. It's not gonna make any more power with a different size throttle body. Wait, there's an inch here, or an inch and a half, or 2 inches, or 4 inches. If there's 4 inches, you're about to get a home run when you put a bigger throttle body on there. If there's an inch or less, the gains are not going to be quite as big, but there will be some. So start thinking about that. And then also you got to look at, like I said, the inlet of the intake manifold, as well as the throttle body. The bigger throttle body by itself won't do it. They both have to be matched so that you get maximum airflow going into the common plenum. So let's refresh. NA manifold, yes, bigger throttle body if you have enough power. If you have a stock junkyard motor, you don't need a 102 millimeter throttle body on your otherwise junkyard LS. It's a waste of time. Just use a stock one. Even on a cammed one, a stock intake manifold and a stock throttle body will work pretty well. If you're running boost from a turbo or a centrifugal blower, don't worry about the throttle body. Use what you have. If you're running a positive displacement blower, now it's time to really step up and use a big throttle body, or like we have in the thumbnail, two big throttle bodies. Get as much airflow into it as you can. And so that's how it all works out. Now that we've talked about what to do, here is the potential downside. And this is less the case with a blow-through application like a centrifugal blower or a turbo application, because you're not going to use a big throttle body anyway. So that's just all going to work out just fine. On the NA combinations, until you go to a really big throttle body, you're not going to experience this, but you will when you go to a very big throttle body, especially on a big motor where you're making lots of power. But you will definitely experience what I'm about to explain on a positive displacement supercharged combination with big throttle bodies. And that is the super responsiveness of the tip end. Because now what's happening is when you were moving your 78 millimeter blade and you had 10% throttle in, 10% throttle angle in it, you have less airflow. Now with a 102 millimeter throttle body, and you move it and you have 10% throttle angle in it, now you're moving a lot more air. And what happens is, if you're taking off, when you tip into that, all of a sudden, instead of your motor making 70 foot-pounds of torque, now it's making 150, or it's going from 150 to 250, whatever your numbers are at whatever throttle angle that you're talking about. It's going to be dramatically more because the airflow has increased substantially. And so it's going to make the thing really touchy on the low speed power part of it. So the drivability with a big throttle body, the drivability itself, once you're cruising, is fine because the airfield is right, the timing's right, all of that's fine. It's just that initial hit when you're going in and getting it going can be problematic. It just can be touchy. The throttle can be very touchy on some of these big throttle applications. So you'll want to watch that. And then to a lesser extent, that kind of thing can also happen on NA combinations. I remember putting the big 65 millimeter throttle body on my Focus, and the same thing is that it's just, even though that's not a super powerful motor, but it's way different with that throttle body. And I hogged out the inlet side, because the intake manifold should match the throttle body. But I hogged that out, put a 65 on there, and we did end up making a little bit more power. But the thing that changed dramatically is the thing that I'm describing, is the drivability, is the rolling into the throttle, is the touchiness of the throttle of the bigger throttle body, because all of a sudden you're getting a big hit. The cool thing is it feels like it makes the throttle body upgrade like that feel like it made a huge change in power, because all of a sudden it's like, oh man, that thing's got a ton of power. Well, a wide open throttle, it might be the same, it might be a little bit different, but it certainly feels like a whole bunch more on that tip end. And the same thing, and on a blower application, it can be exaggerated even more, because now you've moved it and now you're making boost, and it's a whole thing. So that's my discussion on throttle bodies. I'm going to see how our poll is doing, and then we can get to some questions. Will too big of a throttle body lose power down low? 71% are saying no, and 29% are saying yes, that we lose power down low. So let's see what you guys are doing. I've been told that a 65 millimeter is all you need on the 94 to 95 Cobra GT40 style intake, that going any bigger won't make any more power. Is that the size of the opening in the manifold? If it is, then you're fine. I think I remember a 1994 Cobra. So that's a cast iron version. I mean, a cast aluminum version, because we ran one of those when I did my big Cobra shootout. And I think we ran it with a 65. What's a twin 58? TPI says it's equal to 1,000 CFM. It might be 1,000. I think that they have a 1,200 also, if I remember right. But I think we ran a twin 58 on some of the tune port testing I was doing. Do slide style carb throttle bodies flow more air than a larger or smaller carb size with a throttle body and throttle blades? So something that gets it out of the way completely. Yeah, any sort of opening that doesn't have any barrier in it, like a blade, would flow more. Mexico. So there are many ways you can get around this. With a rising rate throttle linkage, you can. Or the other way to get around it is with drive-by-wire. Google, is 4030 bore 408 LQ4 block fine for under 15 pounds of boost? An LQ4 block is good for 1,500 horsepower, so you're fine. People think cylinder walls, what you think? Going from 4-inch to 4030 is not going to change that much. It's fine. But the thing is, I wouldn't measure it by 15 pounds, because 15 pounds on a 4.8 is going to be way into 4 digits. let's see what people are doing down here. How can you tell on a centrifugal blower EFI setup? I don't know what that question is. Hit the like button. Looking at an AccuFab oval blade for my trick flow intake. They're really nice. That's the one that we ran on the, when we ran the, I think it was a Ford Racing Coyote 2300 blower on the LS. I think, and we ran the AccuFab oval throttle body. It worked good. Could you put a blower blowing out the exhaust? That's kind of what they did. They used it to scavenge on a Detroit diesel, but not really on a gas motor. So if I put a stock throttle body on a fast LSX RT, will it benefit you? Will it benefit you in what way? I have not seen the new Mustang. BMW did a weird dual throttle body with 2 different blade sizes that open progressively at different speeds. The ZR1, Chevrolet's original ZR1, the LT5, the 4-cam deal, had a throttle body like that. They had a twin throttle body, twin blade throttle body, but also had a small third center blade that was very small that they used for cruise. And so the other blades didn't open up until after that one went by. The new Mustang has 2 throttle bodies. Does that make more power? Yeah, obviously. Is it a waste of money if a 6-liter has stock heads and a stage 2 cam going to 102 millimeter throttle body and a fast intake? No, a fast intake manifold will make more power than that truck manifold will. It always does. It's just that you don't really have enough motor to take advantage of that. But it's going to be 15 or 20 better. If you hog out a 94 to 95 Cobra intake for something bigger than a 65, would you still hit a wall and not make any power? You need to think about whether or not that intake manifold is the restriction in your motor making power. Is it? Is it the upper? Is it the lower? Is it the fact that you don't have any camshaft in it? Is it the fact that you have stock exhaust manifolds on it or stock heads on it? What is the thing that is stopping that from making power? Maybe it's all of those things, but you'd have to look at that. So it went from a 65 millimeter stock throttle body to a BBK 78 millimeter throttle body. You did that on your PI intake manifold? I ran 102 millimeter on my Engine Masters LS engine with rec port Escalade intake. I never tried to run the stock throttle body, but we made 573 with that setup. That's good. I mean, you didn't hurt anything by running that. Like to do something like a dual 68 millimeter, like you can for the Terminator Cobras, but with the throttle blade shaft separated in the middle and 2 drive-by-wire motors. Oh, okay, so you want to do dual drive-by-wires? Should I be worried about modifying a 5.3 with 150,000 miles? All of the Big Bang motor, I think the most that we ran probably had about 300,000 on it. I know that the 6-liter that I did of Chad's had 249,000 on it, so we don't even care what the mileage is on the motors. Stock throttle body on an LSX RT make more power than a stock manifold on an LS1 243 head with just the manifold design. An LSX RT makes more power than a stock LS1 manifold, and not by a little bit, by a lot, no matter what intake manifold that you put on there. But I would match the throttle body, the throttle opening of the manifold with the throttle body. And you can put whatever throttle body you want on the LS1 intake manifold, but its opening is only designed to accept that 78 millimeter size. Because the question you're really asking is how much power comes from the bigger throttle opening. And the answer is take a look at an LS2 manifold. An LS2 manifold is not very good, despite the fact that it has a 90 millimeter opening, but it makes nowhere near the power that a Trailblazer SS does. So it's not the throttle opening size, it's the manifold. And if that were the case, if it were throttle opening size, a fast LSXR or an LSXRT, which by the way, both make the same power. The curves are almost identical. I've tested it 6 or 7 times now, and they're identical. If that was the case, and it was an airflow thing like throttle body size does, then all the gains would be at the top. But that's not what happens. You want to put a catalytic converter before the turbo? I think Subaru may have had cats before the turbo on. I'm thinking, I thought somebody showed me that they had cats before the turbo and then they had cats after the turbo. So if there are any Subaru guys out there, correct me if I'm not wrong, if I'm wrong there. Went to a big boy BBK throttle body plenum a while back. Still have the deal. I'm sure I'll find use for it. I did testing, Admiral. I did testing, and I think that the video is up. I did testing on the elbow and throttle body upgrades for the 462 valve on an otherwise stock PI intake manifold, and all of them made power compared to the stock one. So we ran an AccuFab 75 millimeter, I think, and then his billet elbow. And then the ones with the dividers, the Dragon ones or who's ever, and I don't know if we had a BBK one. I don't know if they had one back then, but I ran five or six of them, I think. And then I ran them NA, and then I also ran them under boost. Stacy, why are your videos so good? Because I pour my heart and soul into them. Richard, do you think using an FR500 on a high RPM capable engine is worth it for Imrc setup? Or should I just do a simpler intake? Well, if you're only thinking about high RPM and not thinking about the whole curve, then I would just pick a manifold that's going to be a short runner deal, or a medium one, something that's a split in between them, like a Boss manifold, like a Boss 290 manifold. If you tried an eBay 92 millimeter throttle body, I've seen a couple of them, and we've tried a couple ones that are cheap ones that I didn't get, but they were from customers that had come in. And the flow rate is probably okay, but the sealing and the idle stuff is like you can hold the throttle body up, and there's a big difference between those and like an AccuFab or a factory throttle body. The quality and the fit is just not anywhere near what it is. WRX early 2002 era did have the ones before. See, people in Puerto Rico use throttle body as an exhaust cutout. They rig the cable and the e-brake handle for activation. Yeah, we've had exhaust cutouts, and that's basically what it is another throttle door, basically. The throttle bodies are usually aluminum, so depends on how far back it is as to how much temperature you could apply to it. What are the best heads I can run with an E303 cam? I don't know what the best ones are. There's lots and lots of good ones. There's lots of heads out there that would give you all of the power that you're going to make out of that combination, because an E303 is not a very big camshaft. And I don't know what intake is on there. But an AFR 165 or a 185 or an 11R trick flow or a standard twisted wedge head, there's lots of good ones out there. Simple man, your remote throttle body. Oh, your remote tuner doesn't like the big throttle body. It is, it is touchy, but there's lots of them running around, so you should be able to get it to work. I did the one-piece BBK. they have out now. I think it was an 86. I can guarantee it flowed way better than the two-piece one. What about downdraft intakes or ITB throttle bodies? Those are really cool, but the throttle body portion of that is not the important thing. The manifold design for me is the important thing. You have whatever the stack length is kind of the critical thing, and that's gonna help determine what the power output is. But you have a lot more flow rate on all of those. You should have more total flow rate from that, but that's not usually what gets you the power. My clutch is making chattering noise when I'm releasing it. This happened after dumping it at the clutch. Did you break the Marcel in it, or break the spring hubs? Admiral, take a look. I have videos up on the FR500. You can see what it does to the curve relative to a stock one. I've never used sliding throttles or barrel valves. I've never tested them anyway. Proper ring gap for a 2.5 turbo Dodge, Ford Pistons. Hopefully you have the piston to wall clearance, right? Also, John Robinson, are you lost in space? But it normally is 6.5 thousandths per inch of bore. Wish somebody made a twin plenum, twin throttle body Fox intake. BBK did one back in the day. But there are 2 GLHSs on Bring a Trailer. I'm all good on. I have a GLH with the S in parentheses. A GLHS tribute car. I've already had somebody blast me on a comment about that. You know, your car is not a GLHS. It's not a numbered matching serialized Shelby version. I'm like, hey, dude, ease up. It's okay. I won't be part of your club. I won't be coming to the Honeycomb Hideout. Well, too big of a throttle body, lose power down low. 67% saying no and 33% saying yes. Hey, 67%ers. Putting a longer trumpet on ITB have the same effect as a longer runner on a regular manifold. It is. That is a longer runner. That's what you're doing. You can take a look. I have a video up where we did trumpet extensions on a IR manifold. I think I did it on a Hemi, and may have also done it on an LS. Jason, Richard, I'm going to go for 1,000 horsepower 5.4 mod motor on a 77 LTD. Need all the response possible. So you need to size your turbos so they don't make too much more than 1,000 horsepower. So you'll get all the response. You need to do what you can to make the motor fairly responsive, meaning more powerful down low. You can make 1,000 horsepower pretty easily out of a 5.4. I'm sure is it a 5.4 valve? I hope. And then so you don't need a lot of camshaft in it. You could put stage 1 cams in there and in a 5.4, ported heads, some kind of long runner manifold, not a short runner one, not a Sullivan, not something like that. That's not going to be responsive. Put something else in there and then just turn the boost up and it'll work good. John, I can't stand the numbers matching all original types. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with a guy having a 86 Omni GLHS and likes it. It's just that you shouldn't put down what others are trying to get done here. I'm trying to get something. I'm telling that guy what he doesn't realize, I think, is I'm telling that guy how cool his car is, that I don't have that car, that I'm trying to be like that, but I'm not. I don't actually want to buy that car. Like, I don't want to have that car. I would much rather have my Santa Fe Blue one that has a T2 GLHS swap in it that hopefully will be emissions legal. To me, it's like a way cooler story than me saying I have number 367 or whatever the number is on the thing. I really like those cars. I'm a huge fan, and I'm going to do a lot of like promotion for that like group of people and their vehicles. And so, you know, the guy should realize that. If I ran, say, a GT35 on a heavy Chevy truck at its max boost, where it made 650 horsepower, as a guess, what size motor is that? I hope it's a really small one where it makes 650 horsepower on a GT35. Say I had 100 shot of nitrous, considering turbo maxed out. I know at 450, 100 shot maybe. I wouldn't recommend you maxing the turbo out and then running nitrous on it, because I think your EGTs are going to be really high and your back pressure is going to be really high, and I think you're looking for trouble by doing that. You should just run, if you have nitrous, you should just run a bigger turbo. I don't know if it had the same effect because I'm looking at a Speedmaster ITB kit for the 460 on the OBS, and I pick it up. It has exactly the same effect. If you extend, if we're talking about runner length, if you extend the runner length, it makes more power down low. It does that every time. Watch Amelia Hartford's video on runner length. Did she do one? I've talked to Amelia before. I'll have to fabricate an airbox for filtration and switch to a Holley EFI. And then the airbox, if the airbox seals all of the stacks, then it's not an IR manifold anymore. Then it has a common plenum. That's right, Car Farm. CFX 0, it's 001 though. You got to get it right. CFX 001 is a numbered car. Just wait till you guys see it. It will be all of that and a bag of chips, bag of Cheetos. Should do an EFI intake test on a Ford 460. Terry's in the house. Navigator motor and an F-150. Get the. I've seen quite a few of those actually, of the 544 valve stuff in the wrecking yards. John Robinson, 91 Daytona IROC versus 88 CSX Turbo, both 2.5, 568 trans, cool factors. Both of those are very cool. Just for fun. And Ben's here from Car Farm, so he's the right guy to ask about that. But Ben, what year is your? Don't you have a Daytona? I know that there seemed like there were about 15 CSXs that we robbed stuff off of at the farm. Imitation is the highest form of flattery. Was it Oscar Wilde or Olivia Wilde that said that? I wonder if it would be the same if the extra length was before the throttle blade. It doesn't make any difference where it is, because the reflected wave still has to travel the full length of the runner before rarefication occurs. So it doesn't make any difference. Amelia ran the Super. Oh, she ran the Skyram. Yeah, that's right. I didn't get the reference. I thought maybe she did a test. Four-foot runners. I know they had that manifold at West Tech, so we got to see it up close. Oh, Ben, yours is an 84 Turbo Z. That's like the best year ever, right? Best year of the T1. Manual wastegate controller. What turbo would you recommend for a 6-liter with ported heads and a truck Norris cam? Has 26 ring gap, Gen 4 rods, 650 horsepower, 800 on the 85, an S475 or 7875. VS Racing Gen 2. Make them do bendy straw turns. Actually, the runner length still works with any kind of bend in it, and the power is pretty consistent that way. Brian, you got a 6.1. Oh, it's a 20 over 6-liter together and ready to drop in the C5. How much power is it more than the LS3? Well, it's 0.4 better, right? So you could do the math on that. 0.4 times your specific output. That will tell you how much it's better. I've reached over into the JDM market, and it's almost hard to understand why a 2JZ with a GT45 makes almost as much power as a bigger LS. Rod leverage against crank, air force. No, that's not why. 2JZ has a much better cylinder head. It's smaller, so it's not going to run into exhaust flow limitations before it runs into compressor limitations. And I don't think that a 2JZ with a GT45 will make as much, not a stock one will make as much as a stock LS will. Karlov, you know better than that. What did you do wrong there? I know you prefer manual throttle body, so what is your go-to wiring setup for swaps? I don't have swaps, so I don't know. I'm not a wiring guy. I don't use I only test the things on the engine dyno. So it's easy for me. We plug in a few plugs from the Holley HP, run a manual throttle body, put headers on it, and we're kind of ready to go. What kind of manifold would you put on the CSX Daytona if you had one? Well, are those T1 cars or are they T2 cars? If they're T2 cars, they already have a 2-piece or a 1-piece, so they already have the right manifold on it. I won't know any better than those. In fact, I'm not even certain what those do yet relative to the log style manifold, and certainly relative to each other. I don't know what those do compared to a SUPERCHARGED custom manifold. Can you build a hypothetical CSX for concept? They ran the Skyram on the engine dyno, so we know what it does. I have the dyno results from it. Karlov, go back and read your comment. Tell me what's in there that shouldn't be in there. What's up, guys? Me again. What happens if your rings aren't gap for turbo? Like, does the piston come off the rings or what? No, what happens is the rings get hot, they butt together, they catch on the edge of the bore, and then they snap the ringland off the piston. That's normally what people break, is you break a ringland on the piston. If you get it too hot and you don't have enough gap, that's bad. 2000 LS1 intake has a smaller throttle body than a 5.3. Is your 07 5.3, is that a Trailblazer SS style intake manifold? Because otherwise I thought that the LS1 and the truck manifold were the same size throttle body. Daydream us up a Daytona you'd like to own. Well, we'll be able to see all of what these 2.2s and 2.5s do when we put them up on the dyno. It all depends on what you want to do with it, not what I want to do with it. I'm already doing what I want to do with it. The combination that I want to put together is already together. It's in the car and actually drove around. So it is a bone stock T2 87 swapped into an 85. Now we're going to do other power stuff on the engine dyno and find out what ported heads do, what cams do, what intakes do, what turbos do in the 85 and all those things. And then that way, when you decide to build, hey, I want to take this, and I'll have some of this and a little bit of this over here, and I'll put it all in there, that would be cool. I would also like to see somebody make 1,000 horsepower with an 8-valve, like probably would be a 2.5, because it'd be easier to do it with a bigger motor, I would think. Although I've been mulling that around. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe the forged crank 2.2, if we could get it to RPM, maybe better, but then we're limited in head flow. See, I'm second guessing myself. Yeah. Yep. I have a 750 double bumper on my 392 small block Ford. Would I do better with a larger carburetor? What is the power output of the 392? The 750 is probably fine for that. We would try an 850 on the engine dyno, and maybe it would be worth a little bit more at a fairly high power level. but the 750 probably would be my go-to on the street. You missed the memo. You've been here a bunch of times. With that ring gap, you become a member of the Snap Band. Well, you're just buying new pistons and maybe other things. But if you catch it right away, just a new piston. Gonna need 1/2-inch head studs and a lot of boost. Yep. I'm putting a Skyram on a small block forward. Yeah, I don't think as much as I'm a huge fan of 2Js. I love the Supras. It's just that I don't think in a comparison that I would pick a 3-liter motor over a bigger motor. It's not going to do the same thing. Well, too big of a throttle body, lose power down low. 63% are saying no, and 37% are saying yes. And especially if you took junkyard motors and ran them on the dyno like we did with the Big Bang thing, a Supra is not going to even be close. A stock bottom end Supra is not going to be anywhere near what an LS has done. It's not going to be anywhere near 1,500 horsepower. I have a plenum for a Triton V10 running on a 2-valve Mustang, twin 57mm throttle bodies, just like a Cobra. It's overkill, but it was $55, including the phenolic resin adapter. You have the plenum for a Triton V10. What does that plenum look like? Eric, you just fixed an old TIAC A2300 reel-to-reel tape. That is old school. Although that was really high-end old school. That'd be so much better than a cassette or or an 8-track. That was for real audiophiles, although it's no vinyl. So the idea I want to explore is long runner on the K, so I can accommodate secondary ejectors higher up, but making them cone-shaped act like short runners. So you're going to make them bigger at the beginning. You won't, making them cone shape is not going to change the runner length. The reflected wave still has to travel a given volume unless you've coned them out enough to where you've tricked it and said, hey, this is plenum volume. But I don't think that that's going to be the case. You won't be able to have them act as two things. They're only going to act as one thing. You might be able to get them to make a little bit more power if you taper them, make them bigger than they are now and taper them, which is what I would try. But again, you'll have to, I don't know what the port opening size is on your or on your cylinder head, so it's going to eventually have to go down to that. Biggest upside to an NA motor is that they typically use a lot less fuel wide open throttle. That is one thing I really like about testing like stock 5.3s or stock 5-liter Mustang engines are even better, because you can put 5 gallons of gas in it and you can run for a really, really long time. You can make a lot of 200 or 300 horsepower pulls and not use up any fuel. C5 doesn't have an oil cooler. Going to install one, would it cause problems with street driving? Having an oil cooler is not going to cause any problems. Oil coolers are always good. Did you do testing on removing the inserts on the 3800 NA intake manifolds? I did. I ran it both ways. In fact, I ran the aluminum intake and the composite intake and ran them both with inserts. And as you might imagine, running inserts in them reduced runner length, and it made less power down low and more up top. It's working pretty good now. Looks like it was missing a bushing on the pinch wheel arm right from the day it was made. Had to make one for it. Did you 3D print it or something, or did you just like whip something up? Richard, what would you do with a 90s EFI big block? If it's a big block Ford, you should make it bigger. The nice thing about 460s is there's lots of stroker kits available for them. Carl, I have a 350 with Vortec heads, 280 Magnum cam, 981 16 springs, Holley 650, Wyand street order dual plane. Which one of these things are causing to fall on its face at 5,000 RPM? I don't know. Let's see what is the 280 Magnum cam. It is a single pattern cam, right? And what year is that? Is it a hydraulic roller or is it a flat tappet? I'm thinking since it's a since it has those heads, it's going to be a hydraulic roller. .280 is 224, 224. Well, one of the problems is that it's a single pattern cam. The 224 though shouldn't be making peak power at 5,000 RPM. It should be making power higher than that. The dual plane intake manifold should be making power higher than 5,000 RPM. A 650 will make power higher than 5,000 RPM. Vortec heads will make power higher than 4,000 or 5,000 RPM. So do you have another problem? Do you have ignition breakup? Do you have not enough timing or too much timing? Do you have something else that's going on there? All of those things will, if you take a look at the videos I have up, in fact, we could do that. Do I have? Let's see here. We're going to take a look at a Vortec headed combination that had 224 cam in, although it had a dual pattern camshaft in it. Let's see if I can find this. Small block Chevy, 350. And we have a 350, 246, and 268 cam, which the 268 is kind of what that thing is. Final 268 cam making peak power at a whopping 5,400 RPM. And that combination was 350 Chevy, a truck motor, Vortec heads. This one even had a flat tappet cam, headers with exhaust. We installed an Extreme Energy, also a flat tappet, a 268, which is a 224, 231, and a 110, 477, 480 lift. This had a Speedmaster dual plane intake, a 650 XP, and an MSD distributor, and we had timing at 29 degrees. So all of those things should make more power than that. What's a 981? What's a 981 spring? Are you getting valve float? Let me see if I can find the specs on the 981 spring. That's going to be near 180, 1.8 valve lift or 1.8 install height. 986, 972, 981, 16. No, I can't be that low. Although I don't know, maybe on a 981 is a single spring, sets up at 105 at 1,700. Coil binds at 1,150. So that's enough for the spring, though the rate is going to be, so 1,700, so at 500 lift, 1,200. At 294, that's probably enough for that. If it's a flat tappet cam, that's enough. If it's not a flat tappet cam, if it's a hydraulic roller, you don't have spring in it. You don't have enough spring in it. Any advantage to do dyno tune on a 88 CSX Mopar performance computer, EGT gauge, wideband, and adjustable cam gear? There's always an advantage to running it on the dyno to see what you have, what the air fuel is. And then what I would want to know is in that Mopar performance computer, what is the timing? Like, what is happening with the timing? What is it doing? What does the timing curve look like under boost? Took me all day to get the driver's side half shaft and axle out of my 99 Prelude. All day? How do you feel about deleting oil squirters on forged pistons? To me, it seems it would be beneficial for piston cooling and wrist pin oiling. If you have oil squirters, you should keep them. Any advantage of dyno tuning on an 88 CSX? Yes. Because that would allow you time to adjust the cam sprocket to see what it does, see if it gives you actual power. And then, like I said, I'd want to know what the timing is. You could also see what the air fuel is. Hopefully they have an air fuel monitoring system if you have that. Okay, flat tap it, then that makes me feel better about the springs. Okay, so stock short block minus the cam, what would you do to it? So you're not going to stroke it because you wanted to make more low speed power for towing. I thought that's what you wanted to do. It would need more compression. I think that there's something different about that EFI block, I think, than the early ones. So I don't know what heads you can put on there. But certainly a better head with more compression would be a way to go. There are cams that you could put in there that would be better, and maybe they did something with the timing on the cams on those, advanced them or retarded them or something from the factory. You would want to fix that if that's the case. Oh, so Eric, you made it. That's cool. Richard, have you ever tested a 400-inch motor, 400-plus-inch motor with SP2 on E85? No, I haven't. They have some old cup motors there, but they're not SP2s though. They're way after that. Building a 408, it has 12.5 to 1 compression, AFR 260 heads, 239 cam, 114 fast truck intake manifold. What size turbo would you recommend for street use with a goal of 800? Why are you doing that compression and that camshaft if you're only trying to make 850 wheel horsepower? I don't understand that build. Jason, what motor were you talking about? What's the maximum horsepower on a 350 block? I don't know. I've never run a big bang on a 350 block, but I know that we've done 800 or 900 with them. But it's not something I would do for an endurance motor, that's for sure. How about a block splitting test? That would be good. Richard, on a hydraulic roller, does it make more power at 0 lash, quarter lash, half lash, or 3 turns? 3 turns are not good. It's probably going to hold the valve open. Certainly on LS motors. When we put, what you want to do basically is what we did with the push rod length test on the LS was what you're doing is getting rid of a bunch of the aerated oil in the lifter. So you're effectively turning the lifter into the stock lifter, the standard travel lifter, into a short travel lifter. And it did seem to make more peak power like that. I'm wondering what it would take to add piston squirters. That's a little more involved. Better than Sunday Night Football. Carl, definitely check the timing. If you have too much timing in a Vortec head, it will not be happy. And then consequently, if you have not enough, it will not make much power. And it will fall off more at the top with less timing. You have to machine them in the mains. Yep. You could look at what Honda did. I think that theirs bolted into the block at the bottom of the bores, if I remember right. I got a 2.2 T1 out of the dirt. Sent you the pictures. Thought you'd find it funny. I'll take a look at it. Building a 4302 small block, GT40P heads, 3-inch stroke, and a bore of 4030. So it's a 30 over 302. I want to get 400 horsepower out of it. I've got no idea on cams. 400 horsepower is going to be really, really hard for you to get with those heads. You're going to have to use a pretty big camshaft and a really good intake, and carburetor or an EFI intake is going to make life harder. Might be able to split a block with my magic 3.5-pound sledge. We'll need a bigger sledgehammer than that. Who makes an L92 cam for a Denali while retaining VVT? I think Texas Speed has VVT cams. What's the general acceptable compression on a small block Chevy as a max effort tow vehicle on 87? Is the horsepower of more compression not worth the small window that the motor is happy or reliable? Going up in compression becomes difficult if you're trying to retain 87 octane, because then you start playing the timing versus compression game. You can go up, and if you built the motor, you could build the motor for 87 octane. You could have higher compression, but then you could soften the chamber, you could polish it, you could do some other things that would make it less sensitive to detonation. An aluminum head, a polished chamber, softening the chamber, having the piston at 0 deck. You could do things that would help you along the way, but with one already in there with a bunch of carbon buildup and stuff, maybe actually running water meth through, or even just water injection, or just spraying water in there with the thing running, could clean a lot of that stuff off. And I'll bet it'd be an interesting test to see if you could, what it would take to activate the knock sensor before and after that kind of situation, that kind of cleaning. Uh, 350 Windsor or Cleveland is a different block than 302. Yes, all three of those are different blocks. Admiral, so you want to see a block destroy itself on the 302? Four years of car AC experience. Prius has 12-volt compressor. I'm considering taking air to water and adding fittings, expansion valve, and condenser to produce intercore temperature of 30 degrees. You're removing heat. Is it worth it? You're going to do that on a naturally aspirated motor, on a naturally aspirated Prius? Is 11-to-1 too much compression for 93 octane aluminum head? Those are only part of the equation, those things that you mentioned. There are other things, but no, an LS3, which is near 11-to-1, runs fine on 93 octane. John, other than a wiggle, how can you judge a used turbo's worth? By running it. We spin it and feel the thrust and then call it good. You say a really big cam. The problem is that the GT40 head, it doesn't flow very much, relatively speaking, not compared to any sort of aftermarket head. So an aftermarket head would make more power compared to that head with any camshaft. So that would allow you to reach your power goal of 400 horsepower with a milder camshaft. You might be able to get there with GT40P heads, especially if you ported them. But on stock ones, it's going to be hard to get there because they don't really flow very well. They flow better than a stock head, but it would be very, very hard to get there with a stock head. I don't know that you would be able to do that. I've never made 400 horsepower with a stock head, even on a 392-inch motor with high compression and big cam and all kinds of stuff. It didn't get to 400 horsepower. So you're just limiting yourself with that head choice. Daniel, can you bore a 5.3 or 4-inch? I think guys have, but it's pretty thin. Okay, I'm going to close out the poll because it's time to go. 63% saying no. So the 37% of people that are saying yes, that a throttle body loses power down low, it does not. If you go to wide open throttle at 2,000 RPM, heck, let's make it 1,500 RPM. Let's make it on a chassis dyno. If you go to wide open throttle and 1,500 RPM, at 1,500 RPM on a big throttle body, it will lose 0 horsepower compared to a smaller throttle body. It won't do anything. Because the power output is going to be determined by other things, not by the throttle body. It's going to be determined by the intake manifold and the cylinder heads, and at 1,500 RPM, not really very much by the camshaft, but by all of those things. And actually, especially if it were a 4-cylinder, would be the length of the inlet tubing in front of that, the exhaust, those kinds of things. The bigger you putting a bigger throttle body on there is not going to do anything. It won't lose low speed power. It will do the other things that we talked about. In fact, it'll feel like it's, throatier when you first tip in the throttle because it's a big blade and it feels like it's like going really, like there's getting a lot of airflow, which there is, but it does not lose any power. So we'll end our poll there. If you use a 10-inch throttle body on a 5-liter, will it lose power? No. If you use no throttle body on a 5-liter, just run an open intake manifold. It won't lose any power. Put a 58 millimeter on a 42 millimeter Chrysler 3-liter in a 94 Shadow, and the thing did lose low RPM power. It doesn't. That doesn't happen. So a cone-shaped runner could flow more power. It's not flowing more. That's not what's happening. It's producing a different reflected wave. And you're also changing with a taper. You might also change the inertial ram also. The unforeseen problems having a cone-shaped runner is that it's hard to make. Okay, so how to go about choosing a cam. Take a look at all of the 5-liter stuff that I have up. Take a look at all of the different builds that we have up, and you can see how much power they make, and you get a pretty good idea on where you should be. And then come back tomorrow or come back tomorrow morning, and we can talk about it. Isaac, I've heard when you're under low load cruising, you can run lean AFRs. You can't go to 30-to-1 because it won't burn. It won't even ignite, and enjoy good fuel economy. You can do, and this will be the last question for tonight, you can do what's called lean burn. My Honda is a perfect example, and other CRX high fuels and the CVCC stuff that Honda did, and others have done lean burn. You don't have to be running at 14.7. You can run it leaner, but as you go leaner, it gets harder and harder not to produce misfire. It gets harder and harder for you to ignite all of the mixture because it's not homogeneous. And what they do is that means it's not the same everywhere. You have localized spots of this is a good amount of fuel and it will burn pretty well. Over here, it's like, hey, I don't really got very much fuel over here. Okay, well, you're not going to burn very well, and it's going to misfire. And the way that Honda got around it on my VX, and other people have done it, is, because I won't go into all the descriptions tonight, we'll just go into this one. The way that they do it is they induce swirl or mixture motion. So what they do is they did it by staggering the valve openings. This is a 4-valve motor. They did it by staggering the openings of the inlet valve. So one side's going down before the other, and also they're not going down very far. in pre-VTEC lean burn mode, the valves open very little. And so they're introducing very high speed staggered valve. And so it tends to want to swirl when it's in the combustion chamber. And when they do that, it allows a homogeneous mixture. So it all burns the same and allows you to run, I think we're running 18 or 19 to 1. That's why that car can get like really good mileage. We could get 55 or 56 miles per gallon, cruise a real miles per gallon cruising on the freeway, and it works very well. And so that's one of the problems with trying to run really lean mixtures. And on that note, it's time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I'll be back tomorrow. I got another video going up on I don't know, turbos or cams, you know, that kind of stuff. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow in the morning. Get those projects done.